There's something most people never realize about human behavior. People do not fall in love with reality first. They fall in love with imagination. They fall in love with the emotional movie playing in their own head. And if you understand that one principle, suddenly human behavior starts making sense. You stop asking questions like, why are they pulling away? Or why did they become obsessed after I stopped trying? Because the answer is usually hidden inside fantasy. Now, when I say fantasy, I'm not talking about deception. I'm not talking about pretending to be someone you're not. I'm talking about understanding the emotional image another person secretly wants to experience. Every person has an internal story. Some want rescue. Some want freedom. Some want admiration. Some want peace. Some want intensity. Some want mystery. And the moment someone feels like you fit naturally into that emotional story, their attention changes. Their nervous system changes. Most people make the mistake of trying to convince others logically. They overtext. They overexplain. They chase clarification. They demand certainty. But human beings are rarely moved by certainty. They are moved by emotional tension. Think about the people you couldn't stop thinking about in your own life. Usually it wasn't the person giving you constant, predictable reassurance. It was the person who triggered imagination. The person who made you wonder. The person who felt emotionally unfinished. That unfinished feeling creates psychological momentum. And this is where emotionally distant people become important to understand, especially avoidant personalities. Avoidant individuals often fear emotional engulfment. Pressure feels dangerous to them. Pursuit feels controlling. The more someone chases them emotionally, the more their nervous system starts looking for exits. But here's the paradox. The moment pressure disappears, curiosity often appears. Why? Because, see, fantasy needs space to breathe. When someone is constantly available, constantly explaining, constantly demanding emotional clarity, imagination dies. There's no mystery left. No emotional participation required. But when someone becomes calm, grounded, emotionally self-contained, the other person suddenly has room to project fantasy onto them. Now they begin wondering, what are they thinking? Why do they seem different now? Are they moving on? Why do I suddenly miss them? And that's when the chasing behavior often begins. Not because you manipulated them, but because emotional space activated imagination. Human beings attach harder to what they partially understand than what they fully possess. That's one of the oldest psychological principles in attraction. The brain values what requires emotional investment. This is why overgiving too early often destroys attraction. When everything is instantly available, there's no emotional discovery process. No anticipatio. No tension. No fantasy. Anticipation is emotional fuel. This is why movies use suspense. Why stories use cliffhangers. Why music delays resolution. The brain becomes emotionally engaged through incomplete patterns. Relationships work similarly. Now let's make this practical. If someone constantly feels judged around you, their fantasy becomes escape. If someone feels emotionally safe around you, their fantasy becomes connection. If someone feels deeply understood by you, their fantasy becomes intimacy. Most people are trying to be impressive. Very few people are trying to be emotionally memorable. And emotionally memorable people understand something important. People become attached to how they feel about themselves in your presence. That changes everything, because now you stop trying to win people. Instead, you create emotional experiences. You become calm instead of reactive, present instead of desperate, curious instead of controlling. And ironically, that career eats magnetism, especially with emotionally guarded people. Guarded individuals are constantly scanning for pressure. The second they sense emotional demands, their autonomy alarm activates. But when someone gives them emotional freedom while remaining grounded and emotionally confident, it disrupts their expectations. Now they lean closer. Not because they were forced to, because they became curious. Curiosity is one of the strongest emotional hooks in human psychology, and curiosity grows strongest in emotionally safe uncertainty. That doesn't mean playing games. Games are obvious. Healthy mystery is different. Healthy mystery means you don't emotionally spill your entire identity immediately. You allow connection to unfold naturally. You allow someone to discover you over time instead of consuming your entire emotional world in 1 week. People value what unfolds slowly. And here's the deeper truth most people never hear. Sometimes the fantasy people chase has very little. too little to do with you personally. Sometimes you simply represent freedom, peace, adventure, healing, validation, escape from loneliness. That's why emotionally intelligent people stay careful. They understand projection. When someone becomes intensely attached very quickly, it's often because they are attaching to an internal emotional story, not necessarily reality. This is why self-awareness matters. Because if you don't understand emotional projection, you'll either become addicted to attention or destroyed by rejection. Both are dangerous. Strong people stay grounded in reality while understanding fantasy. They understand attraction without losing themselves inside it. And the healthiest relationships happen when fantasy slowly transforms into genuine emotional trust. Not obsession, not emotional dependency, not manipulation. Trust, because eventually mystery alone is not enough. Fantasy may start attraction, but emotional safety sustains connection. The people who created 8 lasting relationships are not the loudest, most dramatic, or most emotionally aggressive people. They are the people who make others feel deeply seen without making them feel trapped. That balance is rare, and rare things are valuable. People chase emotional experiences far more than they chase logical arguments. And this explains why so many relationships become confusing to people who rely only on reason. Human beings like to believe they make decisions rationally, but most emotional attachment happens beneath conscious awareness. People remember how someone made them feel long before they remember what was actually said. A person can present perfect logic, constant reassurance, and endless explanations, yet still fail to create emotional attraction. Meanwhile, someone else can say very little, but create a powerful emotional atmosphere that becomes unforgettable. That difference changes everything. Attraction grows strongest when someone feels understood inside their private, emotional world. Every person has emotions they rarely express openly. Some people secretly want to feel admired because they spent years feeling invisible. Others want emotional safety because chaos followed them throughout life. Some crave freedom, mystery, excitement, peace, or validation. These hidden emotional desires shape behavior more than most people realize. When another person naturally connects with those unspoken feelings, emotional attachment begins forming almost automatically. This is why certain people become unforgettable. It is rarely about appearance alone or perfect communication skills. It is about emotional resonance. The other person feels seen in a way they cannot easily explain. They feel understood without having to defend themselves constantly. Their nervous system relaxes around that connection. That emotional comfort creates psychological significance. Most people fail in relationships because they try to convince instead of connect. They overload the other person with explanations, pressure, reassurance, or emotional intensity. But attraction is not built through pressure. It is built through emotional experience. People become attached when interactions create feelings they cannot easily recreate elsewhere. This is why emotional intelligence matters more than memorized techniques. Someone who truly understands human behavior knows how to listen beneath words. They notice emotional patterns instead of surface statements. They understand that when someone says, "I need space," the deeper meaning may actually be fear, overwhelm, uncertainty, or emotional exhaustion. And when people feel emotionally understood, rather than judged, they naturally move closer instead of pulling away. This principle becomes even more important with emotionally avoidant individuals. Avoidants often struggle with emotional pressure because closeness can feel psychologically threatening to them. Chasing them aggressively usually increases distance. But when someone creates emotional safety without becoming controlling, curiosity begins to grow. The avoidant person starts feeling understood instead of trapped. That emotional shift changes the dynamic completely. People also chase experiences that strengthen the identity they want for themselves. Around certain individuals, they feel confident, desired, intelligent, peaceful, or emotionally alive. Those feelings become addictive because human beings constantly search for environments that reinforce their ideal self-image. In many cases, they are not only attracted to the person, they are attracted to the version of themselves that appears in that person's presence. This is why calm confidence creates more attraction than desperation. Emotional steadiness feels safe. It gives the other person room to emotionally participate instead of feeling forced into connection. And when emotional participation happens naturally, attachment grows deeper because the experience feels authentic rather than manipulated. At the core of all attraction is emotional meaning. People chase what emotionally moves them, what emotionally understands them, and what allows them to feel connected to a hidden part of themselves they rarely show the world. Fantasy is stronger than persuasion because human beings are emotionally driven far more than they are logically driven. Most people believe attraction happens because someone says the right words, gives enough attention, or proves their value through constant effort. But in reality, emotional attachment usually grows from imagination, not facts. People are rarely addicted to an actual person alone. They become addicted to the emotional experience and private story they build around that person in their own mind. This is why someone can barely know another person and still become emotionally obsessed. The mind begins filling in missing information with fantasy. It creates meaning where there is uncertainty. It creates emotional depth before genuine intimacy even exists. The less clarity people have, the more imagination begins participating. And imagination is powerful because it personalizes attraction. The fantasy becomes emotionally customized to the individual experiencing it. A person may think they are chasing someone specific, but often they are chasing what that person represents emotionally. Maybe the person symbolizes excitement after years of boredom. Maybe they represent emotional safety after painful relationships. Maybe they represent confidence, freedom, healing, validation, mystery, or escape from loneliness. The emotional symbolism becomes stronger than reality itself. This explains why persuasion often fails in relationships. The more someone tries to logically convince another person to stay, love them, or understand them, the weaker they sometimes appear emotionally. Persuasion creates pressure, and pressure can break emotional tension. Fantasy works differently. Fantasy allows the other person to emotionally, participate. It invites curiosity instead of forcing conclusions. Human beings become emotionally attached to unfinished emotional experiences. This is why uncertainty can create obsession. When everything is fully explained, fully predictable, and emotionally exposed too quickly, the brain stops imagining. The mystery disappears. But when emotional space exists, the mind naturally starts building stories. People replay conversations, analyze behaviors, and search for hidden meaning. The emotional investment deepens because the imagination becomes active. This is also why emotionally unavailable or avoidant individuals can accidentally become highly desired. Their distance creates unanswered emotional questions. The other person begins chasing emotional resolution. They are no longer simply interacting with reality, they are interacting with fantasy, projection, and hope. In many cases, the attachment becomes more about the imagined future than the actual present relationship. Fantasy is especially powerful because it activates emotion without resistance. Logic often feels cold and confrontational. Fantasy feels personal and emotionally alive. It bypasses defenses. A person may logically know a relationship is unhealthy, yet emotionally remain attached because the fantasy still exists. They are holding on to the emotional story they created, not necessarily the reality they experienced. This is why emotionally intelligent people remain careful about projection. They understand that intense attraction does not always equal deep compatibility. Sometimes people are simply attaching their unmet emotional needs onto another human being. And when reality eventually conflicts with fantasy, disappointment appears. The strongest connections happen when fantasy gradually transforms into authentic emotional understanding. Healthy attraction begins with curiosity and imagination, but lasting relationships require truth, trust, and emotional stability. Fantasy may eat the spark, but reality determines whether the connection can survive over time. At the deepest level, people do not only want another person. They want the emotional experience that person awakens inside them. And the story created around that feeling often becomes more powerful than persuasion ever could. Mystery creates emotional investment because the human mind is naturally drawn toward what feels incomplete, uncertain, or partially hidden. People often assume attraction grows from giving constant explanations, constant reassurance, and total emotional transparency from the beginning. But in reality, over-explaining yourself can remove the very tension that creates emotional curiosity. When everything is instantly available, the imagination has no role left to play. And imagination is one of the strongest emotional forces in human psychology. When you stop over-explaining yourself, people begin filling the silence with their own thoughts, interpretations, and emotional projections. The mind starts asking questions. It starts searching for meaning. It starts replaying interactions and looking deeper into small details. That process creates emotional participation, and emotional participation creates investment. This is why certain people remain unforgettable even when they said very little. Their presence created emotional curiosity. They did not constantly try to control perception or force understanding. Instead, they allowed the interaction to breathe naturally. That emotional space gave the other person room to think, imagine, and emotionally engage. Most people sabotage attraction because they try too hard to remove uncertainty. They explain every feeling immediately. They clarify every misunderstanding instantly. They seek reassurance before emotional tension has time to naturally develop. But attraction often requires a certain amount of unanswered emotional energy. Not confusion, not manipulation, but emotional openness that unfolds gradually over. Time. Human beings value what they emotionally work for. When someone has to slowly discover another person layer by layer, the connection feels more meaningful. The brain becomes more invested because it participated in the process of discovery. This is similar to why suspense works in movies or why unfinished stories remain stuck in memory. The mind stays emotionally engaged when resolution is delayed. Mystery also communicates emotional confidence. People who constantly over-explain themselves often appear anxious about how they are being perceived. They rush to defend, justify, or prove themselves before anyone even asks. But emotionally grounded individuals understand they do not need to constantly manage another person's interpretation. They allow others to gradually understand them through consistent behavior rather than endless explanation. This calm emotional restraint creates psychological weight. It signals self-control, confidence, and emotional security. And those qualities naturally increase attraction because they feel stable and rare. Mystery becomes especially powerful with emotionally avoidant or emotionally guarded individuals. These people are highly sensitive to pressure. The more someone pushes for immediate emotional certainty, the more they instinctively withdraw. But when interactions feel spacious, emotionally safe, and non-demanding, curiosity begins to replace defensiveness. The avoidant person no longer feels trapped. Instead, they begin wondering about the person who is not chasing them for validation. However, healthy mystery is not the same as manipulation or playing games. Manipulation creates confusion intentionally. Healthy mystery simply means allowing connection to develop naturally instead of emotionally overwhelming someone with your entire inner world all at once. It means maintaining your individuality, emotional balance, and sense of self rather than trying to force instant intimacy. People are emotionally drawn to are those who feel internally complete. Someone who remains calm, emotionally grounded, and slightly unpredictable often creates stronger emotional impact than someone who desperately tries to be fully understood immediately. The unknown activates imagination, and imagination deepens emotional focus. Attraction grows strongest when there is both emotional safety and emotional curiosity existing together. Too much certainty can feel emotionally flat. Too much uncertainty can feel unsafe. But balanced mystery creates emotional movement. It keeps the connection alive because the other person continues wanting to learn more. In the end, mystery works because silence invites imagination. And imagination is where emotional investment begins. Validation is not the same as connection. And confusing the two is one of the biggest mistakes people make in relationships. Many people believe that if they constantly reassure someone, constantly praise them, constantly prove loyalty, and constantly provide emotional comfort, attachment will naturally grow stronger. But emotional validation and emotional connection are not identical experiences. Validation can temporarily soothe insecurity, but true connection creates emotional depth, curiosity, and psychological significance. Constant reassurance often lowers emotional tension. It creates comfort, predictability, and certainty. While those things can be healthy in balanced amounts, too much reassurance too early can unintentionally remove the emotional energy that creates attraction. Human beings are emotionally stimulated by discovery, curiosity, and anticipation. When everything becomes emotionally guaranteed, the interaction can start feeling emotionally flat rather than emotionally engaging. This is why some people become confused after giving someone endless attention, reassurance, and availability, only to feel the other person slowly lose interest. They assume love is built by proving devotion constantly. But attraction is not only about comfort. It is also about emotional movement. People become attached when interactions create feelings they cannot fully predict or emotionally replace elsewhere. Validation answers emotional uncertainty immediately. Connection invites emotional exploration. There is a major psychological difference between the two. A person can feel validated because someone constantly compliments them or reassures them. But that does not necessarily mean they feel deeply connected. Real connection happens when someone feels emotionally understood, emotionally stimulated, and emotionally affected. It happens when conversations create reflection, emotional curiosity, vulnerability, and presence. Those experiences stay in memory far longer than repetitive reassurance. Emotional curiosity increases attachment because curiosity keeps the brain engaged. The mind naturally focuses on things that feel emotionally unfinished or emotionally meaningful. This is why people replay certain conversations in their head for days. It is why they think about people who made them feel something unexpected. Curiosity activates imagination, and imagination deepens emotional investment. This principle becomes especially important in modern relationships because many people overcompensate with validation out of fear. They fear losing the other person, so they overgive emotionally. They overtext, overexplain, and overreassure. But excessive validation can sometimes communicate anxiety rather than confidence. It can remove the emotional space necessary for natural attraction to grow. Emotionally confident people understand that connection is not built by constantly managing another person's emotions. Instead, they create an environment where the other person feels emotionally safe while still remaining emotionally engaged. They listen deeply. They remain present. They allow conversations to unfold naturally instead of forcing emotional certainty every moment. This is also why emotionally avoidant individuals often pull away from excessive reassurance. To them, too much emotional intensity can feel overwhelming or controlling. But emotional curiosity feels lighter. It feels voluntary rather than pressured. When someone feels emotionally free instead of emotionally managed, attachment often develops more naturally. Healthy relationships require both reassurance and curiosity in balance. Without reassurance, people feel emotionally unsafe. Without curiosity, relationships lose emotional energy. The strongest connections happen when two people feel secure enough to relax, yet curious enough to keep discovering each other over time. Attraction fades when everything becomes emotionally predictable. Human beings are wired for emotional engagement, not emotional automation. They want to feel alive inside interactions. They want moments that create anticipation, reflection, surprise, and emotional depth. In the end, validation may calm emotions temporarily, but connection transforms emotional experience. One reduces anxiety for a moment. The other creates lasting emotional significance. And people rarely chase what merely comforts them. They chase what emotionally moves them. Avoidance and emotionally distant people respond to emotional safety, not pressure. And this is one of the most misunderstood dynamics in relationships. Most people assume that when someone pulls away emotionally, the solution is to chase harder, communicate more intensely, or demand reassurance. But with emotionally avoidant individuals, that approach often creates the opposite effect. The more pressure they feel, the stronger their instinct becomes to emotionally escape. Avoidant personalities are highly sensitive to feelings of emotional overwhelm. Deep down, many of them associate closeness with loss of freedom, emotional exhaustion, criticism, or disappointment. Some learned early in life that vulnerability was unsafe. Others developed emotional distance as a coping mechanism after painful experiences. As a result, when relationships begin feeling emotionally demanding, their nervous system reacts defensively instead of relationally. This is why chasing them usually activates escape instincts. Constant texting, repeated emotional conversations, demands for clarity, or emotional pressure can unintentionally make them feel trapped. Even if the intentions are loving, the avoidant person often experiences the energy as emotional control rather than connection. Their mind starts searching for distance because distance feels psychologically safer than pressure. What confuses many people is that avoidance can appear emotionally detached while still feeling deeply affected internally. They may care strongly about someone but struggle to handle the intensity of emotional expectations. Instead of moving closer when tension increases, they instinctively create space to regulate themselves emotionally. This behavior is not always about lack of feelings. Often, it is about fear of emotional engulfment. Emotional space, however, creates a completely different reaction. When pressure disappears, avoidants often begin to relax psychologically. Their nervous system no longer feels threatened by demands or emotional urgency. Instead of focusing on escape, they finally have room to experience curiosity, reflection, and emotional longing naturally. This is why emotionally distant people sometimes begin chasing after the other person stops chasing them. The emotional atmosphere changes completely. Instead of feeling pursued, analyzed, or emotionally cornered, they suddenly experience absence, silence, and space. And space activates imagination. The avoidant mind begins wondering what changed, what was lost, or whether the connection is slipping away. Emotional curiosity replaces emotional defensiveness. This dynamic is not about manipulation or playing games. Healthy emotional space is different from intentional coldness. Emotional space, simp. LY means allowing another person freedom without abandoning your own emotional stability. It means staying grounded instead of reactive. It means resisting the urge to force emotional outcomes through pressure. Emotionally secure people understand that genuine connection cannot be chased into existence. The harder someone tries to force closeness, the more unnatural the interaction becomes. Real emotional attachment develops best when both people feel psychologically safe enough to participate willingly. Avoidants especially respond to calm energy. They notice people who remain emotionally balanced instead of emotionally chaotic. Someone who respects boundaries without becoming emotionally desperate often feels safer to them than someone constantly demanding reassurance. Safety lowers their defenses. And once defenses lower, authentic emotional connection has room to grow. This does not mean every avoidant person will suddenly transform through emotional space. Some individuals are simply unavailable or unwilling to develop emotionally. But emotional pressure almost never creates healthy closeness with emotionally distant people. In most cases, it intensifies withdrawal. Strong relationships are built through emotional safety, not emotional force. People move closer when they feel understood, respected, and free to choose connection voluntarily, especially avoidance. Because the moment they stop feeling trapped, they often begin moving toward the very connection they were once running from. In the end, chasing creates resistance, but emotional safety creates openness. And openness is where real pursuit begins. The goal is influence through understanding, not manipulation. And this distinction is what separates emotional intelligence from emotional exploitation. Many people hear concepts about attraction, psychology, and behavior, and immediately think in terms of control. They want to know how to make someone chase them, how to trigger emotional reactions, or how to gain power in relationships. But true emotional intelligence was never designed for control. It exists to deepen awareness, improve communication, and create healthier human connections. Influence that comes from understanding is natural. It does not force outcomes. It observes how people think, feel, and respond, and then interacts with that reality in a respectful way. Manipulation, on the other hand, distorts reality to produce a desired response. It creates imbalance by hiding intent or engineering emotional reactions for personal gain. One builds trust over time. The other erodes it, even if it works temporarily. When you understand human behavior deeply, you begin to notice that most people are not difficult on purpose. They are reacting from patterns shaped by past experiences, emotional wounds, attachment styles, and internal beliefs. Emotional intelligence allows you to see those patterns without judgment. Instead of labeling someone as too distant or too needy, you start to understand the emotional logic behind their behavior. This understanding changes how you communicate. You stop reacting impulsively and start responding thoughtfully. You become more aware of timing, tone, and emotional context. You learn that sometimes silence communicates more safety than words. Sometimes space communicates more care than pursuit. And sometimes listening without trying to fix everything creates a deeper connection than constant advice or reassurance. Ethical emotional intelligence also requires self-awareness. It is not just about reading others, it is about understanding your own emotional triggers, insecurities, and motivations. If someone is using emotional concepts only to control outcomes, they are often still operating from insecurity themselves. They are trying to manage rejection, uncertainty, or abandonment by influencing others instead of regulating themselves. But when emotional intelligence is used ethically, it becomes a tool for growth rate, R than control. You begin to ask better questions. Why am I reacting this way? What emotion is driving this urge to chase, withdraw, or control? Am I trying to connect, or am I trying to feel safe through control? These questions build emotional maturity. In relationships, ethical influence means creating environments where both people feel psychologically safe to be honest. It means not punishing vulnerability, not exploiting emotional openings, and not using someone's feelings against them. It also means recognizing when someone is not ready for connection and respecting that boundary instead of forcing emotional closeness. Healthy communication grows from mutual understanding, not emotional pressure. When both individuals feel seen and respected, trust becomes the foundation of influence. People naturally move closer to those who make them feel emotionally understood without feeling controlled. That is a real attraction. Not forced, not engineered, but naturally developed through selection, fetish, and awareness. Manipulation may create short-term compliance, but it damages long-term trust. Influence through understanding creates long-term connection, even when disagreements happen. It allows relationships to remain stable because they are built on clarity rather than emotional confusion. At its highest level, emotional intelligence is not about getting what you want from others. It is about understanding human behavior so well that you stop needing to control it. You begin to respect emotional reality instead of trying to override it. And in that space, communication becomes clearer, relationships become healthier, and self-awareness becomes the strongest form of personal power.